My brother took my wife and stole my money, thinking he could escape without consequences. But their plans collapsed right at the airport. How far did I go to destroy them? My name is Michael, I'm 28 years old, and here's what I'll tell you. Sometimes life throws such a trap your way that all you can do is sigh and think, really? Is all of this for me? You know what I mean. I have a wife, Sarah, she's 26, and a brother, Josh, who's 24. Everything was going smoothly, except for one big but. When your younger brother starts feeling too comfortable in your life, it's time to think. One day I got home from work a little earlier than usual. I walk in and see this scene. Josh is sitting on my couch, sprawled out like he's in charge. His eyes are slightly squinted and he's smiling. At first glance, nothing special, just a brother hanging out. Maybe stopped by for a visit. But what made me uneasy was when Sarah walked out of the bedroom and they exchanged a look like they had just hit the jackpot. To say something clicked inside me would be an understatement. The first alarm was quiet, but loud enough to stir suspicion. Sarah seemed to act normally, but changed the subject a bit too quickly when I walked into the room. And Josh, well, let's just say that smirk spoke volumes. Have you ever seen someone who looks like they've just won, but is trying not to celebrate too openly? That was Josh. And I thought, what game is being played here? The situation was tense, but I decided not to make a fuss just yet. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just work stress getting to me. But still, something inside told me it wasn't about fatigue. Josh was clearly too comfortable, and Sarah avoided direct answers. Everything became sticky and strange, like someone had set the stage, and I had accidentally become the audience. But you know what's the creepiest part? That feeling when everyone around pretends nothing's happening, and you're the only one starting to lose your mind from suspicion. That's how I felt at that moment. After that day, things began to spiral downhill quickly. I tried to act normal, but it became impossible. Sarah became more distant, and what used to seem like ordinary outings with friends or work errands now made my brain switch to high-alert paranoia. Josh also started showing up at our place more often than I would have liked. He'd drop by for a minute or just happen to be nearby when Sarah was supposed to go meet her friends. I started feeling like the protagonist of some thriller, where everyone follows the script, and you're the only one who doesn't know the plot. One evening, when Sarah went out for yet another meeting, I stayed home, lost in thought. I decided to check her phone. I know, it sounds like something out of a movie, but when everything inside you screams that something's wrong, you're willing to take any step. She had left it on the coffee table, and I couldn't resist. Honestly, I was scared of what I might find, and for good reason. I opened her messages and my heart sank. There were texts from Josh, and this wasn't just polite chatter between a brother and sister-in-law. No, it was something more. Every message had hidden hints, flirting, subtle but obvious details. Just one example. Can't wait for our next evening together. Yeah, evening. Funny how no one told me about that. At that moment, my hands started shaking. I sat in the dark, in a completely quiet house, holding the phone that had just shattered my sense of normalcy. You know that feeling when you think you've hit rock bottom and it can't get worse? Well, trust me, it can. And this was just the beginning. I put the phone down and tried to pull myself together. Who cares, right? You live your life thinking you're in control, and then bam, your younger brother and wife are slowly building something behind your back. And you're like, all right, I'll deal with it. But inside, everything's boiling. You start noticing every little thing. How she dodges direct answers, how Josh looks at her, how they both get too quiet when you're around. And the more you think about it, the more all these small details start to form one horrifying picture. From that moment, I knew one thing. Trust is the kind of thing that disappears instantly the moment you've been betrayed. And I definitely couldn't trust either Sarah or Josh anymore. After seeing those messages, it was like a shock ran through me. You know that feeling when you're woken up in the middle of the night and you immediately start to panic, not knowing what's happening? That's how it felt. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I knew. Every step they took was crystal clear, and the more I watched, the clearer the picture became. But what to do? Burst in and cause a scene? Too predictable. I started planning my next move. The first thing I needed was to catch them red-handed. Not just exchanging glances or being caught in weird conversations. I needed something solid. I wanted to know for sure, so they wouldn't be able to weasel out of it. I was furious inside, but my rational mind said, Wait, play this smart. One evening, I decided to be proactive. I told Sarah I was going on an overnight work trip, but in reality, I just parked my car around the corner. I don't think she even bothered to pretend to be upset. In fact, she immediately grabbed her phone and started typing. Within minutes, I knew the plan was working. Josh responded right away, and just as I suspected, soon after my departure, he showed up at our house. I sat in my car across the street, watching him enter the house. What can I say? They must have thought they could finally relax and stop hiding. I watched as they sat in the kitchen, poured themselves wine, and started chatting. At first glance, it might have looked like a friendly get-together, except for one thing. They were sitting too close, laughing too loudly, and looking at each other for just a bit too long. At one point, I saw their hands meet on the table. She placed her hand on his, and everything became crystal clear. I was ready to explode. Every instinct screamed, "Bust in! Tear everything apart!" But what would that achieve? Sure, I could cause a scene, and they'd start making excuses, as it always happens. It would just turn into a typical family argument, quickly forgotten, and life would go on. No, I wanted more. I wanted them to pay, completely. I decided not to act on impulse. I held back and drove to a friend's house to think everything through in detail. At that moment, I realized they might think they're playing me, but I was going to set them up in a game they wouldn't win. And that was just the beginning of my plan. After that night, when I saw Sarah and Josh literally making themselves at home, a clear plan started forming in my mind. I realized that simply accusing them of cheating would be too petty. I needed to hit them harder so they would understand not to mess with me. And that's when I remembered something important. Money. Sarah and I had been saving for a house for a long time. It was our joint project, or rather, my project, because I had earned most of the money. And of course, all our savings were in a joint account, so we could access them at any time. But something started gnawing at me. When was the last time I checked the balance? I knew it was time to do just that. I opened the banking app, and as I looked at the numbers, I nearly dropped my phone. Almost half of our savings had just vanished. No notifications, no warnings. My first guess was Josh. He was always good at causing problems, especially financial ones. But whether I was right or wrong, one thing was clear. The money was gone, and Sarah definitely knew about it. I dug deeper and soon discovered that Sarah had transferred the money to another account. And guess who owned it? Of course, Josh. This wasn't just betrayal in a relationship. It was straight-up financial theft. They didn't just want to run away together. They were planning to do so with my money. At this point, the anger inside me began to boil even more. Have you ever felt like you were ready to destroy everything just to calm the storm within? I felt that completely. I hadn't just been betrayed as a husband. I'd been robbed. And that's a whole other level. But as before, I didn't act immediately. I decided to use this as an extra ace up my sleeve. While they thought they were controlling the situation, I was preparing my move. They had a plan to escape, and I was going to turn that plan into their ultimate downfall. The next step was to figure out how they planned to use my money and strike when they least expected it. After all, revenge is a dish best served when your enemy no longer thinks anything could go wrong. After discovering they had taken my money, the plan became clearer. It was obvious. Sarah and Josh were preparing to run, but they weren't going to get away so easily. They clearly thought I hadn't noticed that their perfect plan would work. Naive. So, one evening, when Sarah was once again preparing for a meeting with friends, I seized the moment and eavesdropped on her conversation. All it took was turning on the recording on my phone and leaving it in the kitchen. As it turned out, she was discussing the details of their escape with Josh. They were planning to fly out in a week to another country, using my money, and start a new life there. Great idea, right? Especially if they didn't end up on a no-fly list first. That's when I hatched the plan. Since they wanted a new life abroad, why not help them with their move? I started looking for ways to ruin their dreams in a way they wouldn't see coming. That's when it hit me. Deportation. Josh had once mentioned he'd had visa problems the last time he tried to pull off some shady scheme in another country. I decided to use that as leverage. Through some contacts, I got in touch with a lawyer who helped me devise the perfect setup. On one hand, I reported his attempt to transfer illegal funds abroad, and on the other, I flagged the fraud they committed using my money. Of course, I also provided all the evidence of their affair, financial schemes, and the messages I'd collected from Sarah's phone. Sarah wasn't much better. She knew about Josh's schemes and was actively helping him, so she faced the consequences as well. It turned out that both of them could be deported for financial fraud and attempting to smuggle capital out of the country. And yes, this not only stripped them of the chance to leave, but also officially closed the door to any country they planned to escape to. Over the next week, I quietly and methodically prepared the paperwork, while Sarah and Josh continued to believe they were one step ahead of me. They were making plans for their new life, and I was making my own, one where they would be left with nothing. I even started to relish the thought of them finding out. Josh and Sarah were preparing to run, but they had no idea their dreams were about to collapse. And then, the time came. Josh and Sarah were sure they were almost at the finish line. They had planned everything down to the last detail. Tickets bought, bags packed, money safely transferred. They were probably sitting there, eagerly anticipating their new life, rubbing their hands together and thinking they had finally gotten away. But the trouble was, they weren't getting away. Not this time. On the day of their flight, I made my final move. This time, I acted swiftly and precisely. First thing in the morning, I contacted the bank, providing all the documents on their fraudulent activities. I had all the accounts where they transferred my money frozen. Josh and Sarah's accounts were blocked, which meant the money they had so carefully stolen from me was now inaccessible. Of course, they didn't know this yet. And so, off they went to the airport. I couldn't suppress a smug smile as I imagined their faces when they tried to use their cards or withdraw money and realized they couldn't. The money had disappeared just as quickly as their perfect plan, but that wasn't the end of it. As they made their way to the check-in counter, immigration officials had already received my tip-off. The moment Sarah and Josh approached the checkpoint, they were stopped. I can only imagine what was going through their minds at that moment. Picture it. You're standing there, ticket in hand, thinking your new life is about to begin, and then someone grabs your arm and pulls you aside. Chilling, right? I wasn't there to see it myself, of course, but thanks to my connections, I knew they were detained on suspicion of financial fraud and visa violations. My documents had worked flawlessly. Their escape ended right there at the airport. And you know what? They never even saw it coming. Josh and Sarah now stood facing serious problems, with no money, no tickets, and a mountain of questions from immigration authorities. And that was just the first stage of their perfect life falling apart. They thought they had won, but in reality, they didn't even realize they had lost long ago. When their perfect escape plan crumbled, I knew it was time to deliver the final blow. In terms of revenge, this was the moment when I had to completely destroy any hope they had left. After all, what could be worse than losing not only the money, but everything you've been holding on to? After they were detained at the airport, Josh and Sarah returned home, but it wasn't really their home anymore. It was more like a prison, reminding them of their failure. They had no money, they couldn't leave the country, and all their plans had collapsed. But the story didn't end there. Remember the house Sarah and I were planning to buy with our savings? Well, most of that money had already been put down as a deposit for the property, and that's exactly what I used to my advantage. I went to court and proved that the majority of the money was mine. Not hard to do, considering I worked more than she did, and most of the funds came from my pocket. The legal proceedings went faster than I expected. The court's ruling was simple. The house now belonged to me. But not only that. The judge also ruled that Sarah and Josh, having been found guilty of fraud, had no right to the property, and all the assets they tried to transfer into their names had to be returned. This meant I got everything, from the furniture to the bank accounts they had transferred my money into. When they realized they were left without a penny to their names, I have no doubt it was a massive blow. Josh and Sarah had literally lost everything. They were left not only without money or the chance to escape, but also without a roof over their heads. I can't even imagine what was going through their minds at that moment. I'm sure they realized their life hadn't just gone off course. It was completely destroyed. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines, like a player who had executed the perfect move. Everything they had was now mine, and that was the real victory. They were left with nothing, while I could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that justice had been served. When it was all over, I thought I'd feel like the victor. You know, like in the movies, the hero stands triumphant over the ruins of their enemies' lives. But in reality, it turned out to be a bit different. Yes, I got everything. The money was returned, the house became mine, and Josh and Sarah were left with nothing. They had literally lost everything they had and any chance of starting a fresh life. But here's the strange thing. Inside, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. At first, there was a sense of relief. I got what I wanted, I avenged the betrayal, ruined their plans, and reclaimed my money and property. It was a triumphant moment, knowing they wouldn't be able to recover from this. Josh and Sarah had to literally leave town with empty pockets because, after everything, they had no other choice. They lost their home, their money, and even their reputation. I doubt they'll forget that lesson anytime soon. But here's the interesting part. Once they left, and I was alone in my apartment, surrounded by the furniture and things that now belonged to me, I suddenly realized revenge isn't the end. Yes, I had punished them. They got what they deserved, but inside, there was a strange emptiness. All those plans, all that rage that had been driving me, suddenly vanished, and I was left facing the reality. The reality that I was now alone, without a wife and without a brother, traitorous as he was. Life, it turns out, isn't as simple as an equation where victory equals absolute happiness. I realized that revenge, no matter how sweet, can't fill the holes left by betrayal. I'd proven to everyone that you don't mess with me, but what next? I'd lost my wife, my brother, my trust in people, and now, even though I'd achieved my goal, there was a strange void inside. Justice had been served, but the sense of satisfaction turned out to be temporary. All that was left was to move forward, step by step, rebuilding my life. Now I knew for certain that revenge isn't the end of the road, just a stop along the way. In any case, I did what I had to, and that in itself was a victory.